So this is lesson 12, part 2. It's our final lesson, final video for the fall 2020 semester in COMP2084G. So we've tested out our get APIs, both when we get all products as well as getting a single product. So now we're going to test out the post, put, and delete. We may have to make a few changes. So what I want you to do, run your get on all the products. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy my first product. So I'm going to grab from the first curly brace. So I'm going to copy that. And then up above in my body, got raw JSON. I'm going to paste that in. Now this is an existing product, so I'm going to make a few changes. I'm going to take out the ID parameter because we're creating it. We want to create a new product, so we're not going to provide an ID. SQL Server is going to do that. Our SKU, I'll make this API test 1. I'll let the photo be null. So I'll just set it this way. I'll put this whole thing in the chat. So I'm going to try to create a new product and use the post method for this. So I've got a new product called API test 1. It's in category ID 6. Our price is 3, our alcohol is 5, our volume is 500. I changed the photo to null. And I'm going to see what happens if I submit this. So I'm going to change my method from get to post. And you'll notice what happens. Our API automatically creates a new resource, product ID 10. And now if I run a GET request and put 10 at the end of my URL, it retrieves our new product. So our post method allows us to create a new product. So now I want to try out put and I want to try out delete. So for put, I'm going to copy everything down below that includes the new ID. So I'm going to copy this whole object. I'll come back to my request body and paste it in. So now my JSON object starts with ID 10. I'm going to change the price from 3 to 325. So now I want to use the put method to update this product and change the price. So I'm going to change my method from get to put. My URL stays the same. We still need the ID. If I try and run this with no ID, I get method not allowed. We cannot call a put method if I don't supply an ID parameter. Right here in our controller, our ID, it's a required parameter, it's not optional. So trying to call put, to submit the put method here, it's going to fail without an ID. So if I run my put again with ID 10, we get no content back. Says the server processed the request. So how can we easily check using Postman to see if our update actually executed? So I've changed the price. How can we actually see it? Right, Aiden, you got it. I can just toggle my method back to get. There we go. My price shows as 325. So what we're doing right now with Postman, this is actually how I'm going to mark assignment 2 part 3. I'm going to go to your, hopefully your Azure site /API/ and you're going to give me the URL in your submission to your API. I'm going to run a GET request first and fetch everything. Then I'll find a valid ID and I'll fetch just that one object. I'll then copy everything. I'll create a new object with post, make sure the object gets created. I'll make a change to it using put, and then I'll run a get to verify. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Leo. I didn't realize it wasn't. It will be visible in about 2 seconds, which is not much longer than it's going to take you to do the assignment. Thank you for letting me know. I did not realize that wasn't visible. Sorry about that. Done. Right, and now that if I want to delete it, so I'll just get my new product 10 again. And now I'll run a delete. It says 200 OK. To verify, I'll do what Aiden says. I'll run my get again. And now I get not found. So this is really all I'm going to do to mark your assignment 3. I'm going to go through the get, post, put, and delete sequence and make sure you built the controller properly. You shouldn't have any problems building the controller because you're scaffolding at Visual Studio's writing all the code. You don't actually have to write any code to do the assignment 3. Just scaffold the new controller, put it in the API folder, check it works on Postman, you're done. So you do not have to change the scaffolded code. It works just fine as it is. I know there's no security around it. That's okay for our purposes. We're not going to get into using JWT tokens and things like that. So the last step we're going to take, I'm just going to go back and pull up our Stripe. If you build an API, you've got to document it, because if you don't document it, nobody knows how to work with it. What are the methods? What are the URLs? What are the parameters? So when we worked with Stripe, for example, right, their API reference, so you can see they're using REST with post, get, the various URLs. And their documentation describes, you know, this is a request, this is a charge request. So here, to create a charge, right, it shows us what kind of JSON response we're going to get back. So it used to be that writing this documentation was a lot of work. Got an example here. So here was an API created by another developer, and he manually created all the documentation for this REST API. I had a .NET application that was integrating with his application. So he wrote this 14-page document describing all of the methods and request objects, response objects. It's a lot of work. This is what you have to send in the form post to get a token, and this is what comes back. So developers we used to spend a lot of time writing these documents, and along came Swagger. Swagger is great. So I put a link up on D2L. Swagger is a tool that inspects your API and automatically generates all the documentation. It describes all the methods. It lists all the URL endpoints for each method. And it describes what should be in each type of request and what kind of response comes back. So I've put a link here to the Microsoft site that describes how to use Swagger. So we're just going to install a package, add a few lines of code, and that's it. So Swagger is now, Swagger is a tool and it uses a specification called OpenAPI. And we're just going to follow the advice here in this link. We're going to use, there's a couple of different tools for generating Swagger docs. We're going to use one called Swashbuckle. So there's three components. There's the NuGet package we'll have to install. There's the Swagger generator that inspects our controllers and starts to create the documentation. And then there's a Swagger UI that actually generates a web page right in our application that shows. So I will put the link in the chat, but we'll just go through this quickly. It's pretty quick. So the first thing we need is we need to install this Swashbuckle package. So I'm going to go back to my beer store. I'm going to click on Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. And in here, we're going to search for swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. I'll put it in the chat. So I'm just in the Browse tab. Pardon me. So we want swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core, Swagger tools for documenting APIs built on ASP.NET Core. 71 million downloads, so pretty popular package. When we install this, it's also going to add Swagger Gen and Swagger UI. Visual Studio wants to know which project. We don't need it in our unit testing project, so I just check off my beer store project. It defaults to the latest version 5.6.3. That's fine. So I'm just going to install swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. You can install it from the Package Manager console as well. It's going to add OpenAPI and API description, so I'll accept those licenses. So we've added the package now. So it wants us to install swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. We've done this. It next wants us to add 4 lines of code to our startup. One command in configure services, and a couple of commands in configure. So you can see these in the tutorial link I've posted. They're in yellow. So I'm going to add this one first, in configure services. I'll go to my startup file. We're going to configure Swagger for API documentation. So we're going to call services.add Swagger Gen. So that goes in the configure services. And then down in the configure, I'll put it down at the bottom. We want to enable the Swagger UI and specify the JSON endpoints. So we're going to call use Swagger UI. This code is straight from the tutorial. And we need to set the endpoint. So what URL, what's the address for our Swagger documentation? So we'll run it at Swagger v1 swagger.json. And then we give it a name. So this is our beer store API documentation version 1. So this goes in our configure method. Put it in the chat as well. There may be one other thing we need to do. Oh, yep, there definitely is one other. I missed one line of code here, which is app dot. First, we have to say use Swagger. And then we use Swagger UI. We may have to configure one other thing, but we should be able to try it out now. So we've added the Swagger service, the Swagger Gen service, and we've enabled Swagger and Swagger UI. I'm going to save that. And then we can go back to our browser and try it out. There may be one other step we need, but we'll try it this way because this is everything the tutorial tells us. Install package, add Swagger Gen to configure services, use Swagger and Swagger UI in configure. Now, it says this relies on the API Explorer to discover the routes and endpoints. If the project calls add MVC, we have to do something else. It's discovered automatically. So we may need to do a little more configuring here. How do we try this out? Go to your home, go to your root URL and add /swagger. So it automatically loads an index view. It takes our name from startup, we called it Beer Store API Docs, and it found two API controllers, right? Our values and the products. It inspects, it shows all the models with all the properties. And Swagger even has functionality like Postman. So if I click on Get here, it says, okay, API products has no parameters. It returns a 200 success response and gives a sample. And we can actually use Swagger like Postman. If I click try it out, it actually will run the API call right here from the Swagger docs. It's going to call our get method and return. It also shows you a curl command if you want to run it from the command line. And here's the response, right? It gives us back all of the products. If we wanted to get a single product, I could click get down here, and again, I could try it out. So now I get a text box. If I click try it out, gives me a text box where I can put in a product ID and even test out my API. You do not have to use Swagger in the assignment. There's no marks for it, and I'm not going to consider it for bonus marks. But it's a great tool. We're going to build these APIs. We don't have to go through and document them. Install the package, add 4 lines of code, and we have an automatically generated API documentation file built in. So this saves us tons of time. We're also sure it's accurate. And if we update the API, we make changes in our controller. We can just come back to the startup, update the version basically of the documentation, and it'll create a new version of the documentation. So it saves us lots of time, documents everything for us. So we could then, if someone wants to work with our product API, all we have to do is give them the Swagger link, and they can read the documentation online about how it works. Super convenient. Okay, I promised you to be done by 3:30 today. We are. Are there any questions from anybody before we wrap up for today? All right, if we have no questions, if there's no, thank you, Ryan. That's a good heads up. I should fix the due date for that. Much appreciated. So you do have a quiz on Web API. It's due next Monday, as well as part 3. Neither of these things are going to take you very long. So if you have 10 minutes, just do them now and get them done. Other than that, thanks for playing, everybody. I will see you in a couple of weeks on the 15th at 11 a.m. for your final exam. Okay, good luck with your other assignments, other things you've got going on between now and then. I'll see you all in a couple weeks. And remember, we're starting at 11 a.m., not at 2 p.m. Thanks.